Welcome along to the Maroon and White pod. So we're going to have two episodes of the Hurling podcast this week. So first of all, now we're going to have a review to the Galway and Clare game, and then later on this evening, I will be joined by Sample McNaughton and Michael Hopper McGrath to pay tribute to Michael Coleman and sympathies to everyone in Abbey Hurling Club and everyone associated on the tragic passing of Michael Coleman. What a warrior he was for Galway Hurling. But in this episode, we're going to look back on Galway Clare, as I mentioned, and I'm joined by John Fallon and Carrick Breathnach to look back at the game. Carrick, coming to you first, just even from seeing it in Pearse Stadium on Saturday, the tribute to Michael Coleman's jersey and everything, it was a really nice and touching tribute, wasn't it?
Yeah, I suppose, Paul, for us, both of us, we probably would have heard about Michael Coleman rather than seen him play live. But I think, like, even walking into Pearse Stadium on Saturday night, you could just feel the emotion. And I know from going in with my dad going in and him talking to some of the Galway greats and the respect they had, the crack they had, and the stories they shared. And you could just feel that in Pearse Stadium. And I think it's rare that you have someone that everyone really respects, but also had such fun with. And any of the stories you've heard in any of the podcasts or any of the pieces that people have talked about, it's the fun they had with him, but also the respect they had for him as a hurler. And I suppose he probably broke the mold as a Galway hurler as well. He was completely different to what we had. And to have someone from the 80s and still continue on to the 90s, I remember him barely, maybe in that kind of 95, 96 period. But it was very emotive. And I thought, it was a great touch from the Galway hurling team, from the panel, from the county board, and from everyone to pay respects to him, because he was such a legend. And sometimes it can be difficult to get that right on a night like that. But I think they did, and even how Conor Whelan and Michael Donoghue spoke about him afterwards, I think was a credit to them. I suppose a credit to the man he was and the Galway legend that he is.
Yeah, and for yourself, John, for me and Carol, it's probably hard to remember the stories, but I'm sure you have pictures of him in your head of playing for Galway and everything.
Absolutely. I remember him coming on the scene initially in 1983. I was playing minor at the same time. He was ahead. They won in All Ireland. There was a lot of lads, coming off that. It was a very good time, very promising time for Galway hurling. A lot of underage success, even down to, under 16 minor into that. So those lads coming through, and they were coming through from all sorts of clubs as well. Um, and it was no surprise when he came on the scene in 87 and was midfield, and they won the league against Clare, as it turns out. And remarkably, when you think about it, he not only was he not on the championship team, but he wasn't even on the championship panel. So can you imagine somebody this year playing midfield for Galway in a league final, winning it, and just not featuring in the championship panel? It was bizarre in many ways. And I think even if it wasn't for the surprise success of Abbey the following year, and we were at a time when we had three first-time winners of the Galway Championship that time: Clymer Daly in 1986, Athenry in 87, and then along comes Abbey who had some success at intermediate, so it wasn't as big a surprise, but and Coleman drove that team. And at that time, there's no split season. Guys got a chance to impress for their clubs, and in fairness to Cyril Farrell, who had dropped him the previous year, brought him back in. And as we now know, the rest is history. But I remember interviewing him after that. He was saying that in 1987 All Ireland final, he was on Hill 16, and like a few months earlier, had been centre field on it. Hadn't got injured, anything like that. Uh, and then for him to come along and win in 88 and suffer the disappointments of 89, 90, and all that. But like he lasted longer than that team. There was over a decade of a minute. And things, early 90s, he was coaching Kilkenarden. He was heavily involved with his own club, more recently in Leitrim. That's just in a hurling context. And then away from that, and I got word last Friday night of the tragedy, and I rang a few people, and the following morning, and the amount of things he was involved in Abbey that we never heard of or were aware of. But the people on the ground, even some of them on the ground, wouldn't be aware he was the one that was pulling the string. Breathnach Church, where his funeral is going to take place, the renovation of that, the fundraising of it, and so many other departures. And it's he's such a huge loss, not just to, and there's a huge family of the Colemans and the Cooleys and that whole Abernathy Moy, but a much wider one, because I think anybody that had the pleasure to encounter Michael Coleman at any stage came away from it feeling good, unless you were a centre forward trying to go around him or something like that. He didn't stand on ceremony, but just a wonderful, wonderful individual, lovely, lovely person to meet, lovely demeanour about him and everything. And no doubt the sense of shock that's there, not just in a GA or a hurling context, but throughout that. And it's so sad to anyone that had, he was right up there with all of them, and he was a different type of player. The left hand, the way he moved, all of that. Just a phenomenal individual. It was a pleasure to have known him, and it's just such a terrible, terrible loss. It really, really is.
Yeah, you put it brilliantly there, and it's for even a story like that. I don't think many people knew he was dropped, which is just shows his character and everything about him. And again, sincere condolences to everyone in Abbey Moy and the Coleman family. And we will have an episode later on with Hopper McGrath, who I'm sure will have a few stories about him, and even Sambo McNaughton coming up against him. So stay tuned for that. On the hurling pitch, Carrick, I was chatting to you Sunday at the Gaelic grounds at the Limerick game, and I nearly thought after we got to beaten to Tipperary that maybe this was going to be a tough league campaign, but like serious character is shown already by this side in the last two games against Clare and Kilkenny.
Yeah, I think like I was in Nolan Park the previous week, and you could just see just the body language, maybe even the difference in the body language of the Tipperary game to the Kilkenny game, and again, obviously against Clare. And I think, look, we knew there was going to be games that there was going to be different teams, and you've seen, I think, is it over 35 players from 18, 19 clubs so far in 3 games, which is a monumental amount of players. And I know people are saying, well, okay, Clare were missing a lot, which they were. But for Galway, we have to look out after our own kind of corner, and to have that amount of players getting a chance in the first 3 games is brilliant in a season where we don't have the Walsh Cup. So I think if somebody had given you 2 wins out of 3 at the start of the year, you'd be delighted with it. If somebody had given you 1 win after Tipperary, you'd be delighted with it. And to have 2, I think it's a brilliant building block. And I suppose the other thing, Paul, is that the team is beginning to take shape. And I suppose that the placing of Gavin Lee at 6 is a huge benefit, because that was a question of who would be there, and it probably makes it easier then to pick who's going to be at 3 as well, which was another question we would have had after last year. And that is those are the things that we probably didn't know for the last couple of years. 3, 6, 8, 9, 11, 14. We weren't sure of 4 of those 6 down the spine of a team. And hurling has changed a lot in the last couple of years, but you need those players in those central positions to be dominant. You just look at Limerick. Yes, they have players that can slot in and out, but you need to have a kind of a structure to it. So I think that's a good thing. Is it complete? No. But I do think there is players probably this week. I would imagine there'll be players probably let go from the panel at the moment. Look, you can't carry 50 players throughout the whole league and championship. We understand that, but I do think with the amount of players that have been played, that Micheál and his management team have given lads, a chance. If they've been let go, I'm sure they're being looked after with nutrition and S&C programs, and go and play with their club now for the league when that starts. So hugely, a really beneficial, I think, 3 matches, and a lot of work done. But let's not fool ourselves. There's still a lot of work done, and I suppose at the end of the day, the big aim for Galway is to get out of the Leinster Championship and into the Leinster final or knockout. We didn't do that last year. That has to be number one, whatever happens to the rest of the league.
I thought Carrick Micheál put it excellently after the Tipperary game. There could have been a lot of people down about that result, but he said it was about giving exposure to these young fellas, and it was a great point to put after the game, and even saying we're giving these young fellas exposure because they haven't been given exposure in the past, and we have just seen some of these young fellas really make up the squad in the past years, not being given opportunities, but it's a complete contrast this year.
Yeah, and I think like you need to give lads exposure, as Micheál said. And I think exposure was the right word. You might have seen lads in that first day that we mightn't see even on the 26th again. They might be filtering back to the under 20 squad, for example, but they have got a taste of what it takes. And I suppose it's up to the players and in harnessing with management of under 20s and senior to try and develop then from now to maybe next year. So I do think that was probably a remit of some of those players. And I think that's probably what you get with the likes of Michael Donoghue. He's an outstanding manager. Even I look at the work he had done with Dublin previous, and I would have seen and coached some of those Dublin lads, and that was kind of the same thing. Some lads on the Dublin peripheral, maybe Dublin panel, or younger lads who got a bit of game time to start, and then they know what they have to do for the following year. And I suppose he's cast the net far and wide, and you would hope that the lads that are still in the panel can develop, but also that the lads that don't make it either go back to 20s, or that they continue developing, because we do need lads. It's not realistic for a lad to come from minor or under 20 and straight into a senior setup and thrive. Not everyone goes like that. There's always bumps in the road. So that is what we need. And I think so far, I think you'd have to be very happy with what we've seen.
John, I was referencing it last week. It was our last home game of the league, this was an important one to win and just get over the line, given what happened first day out.
Very much so. I think managers and in all sports take games in blocks. So Galway had a block of 3 games here. Realistically, I think anybody looking at that at the start would say they'll win 2 out of those 3. That would be a good return. I think the 2 they would have targeted to win would be the 2 home ones, probably not winning Kilkenny. So how it transpired is a little bit different. It was, of course, very important, regardless of who Clare had. They're still league champions, they're still All Ireland champions in it. But I think there's a couple of different aspects to this. I think this is Michael Donoghue's second time involved. When he joined previously, there was an established team already there, a team that should have
Yeah.
won All Ireland under Anthony Cunningham a year or two before that. And it was about really polishing that team and bringing them to success. This time around, it's an entirely different thing. You're starting from scratch. He's referenced it himself several times. The remit is a 4-year term there, is to basically start from scratch. And I think that's where his stint, along with Franny Ford and Noel Larkin with Dublin, is going to be a huge help, because when he went into Dublin, they lost a lot of players through retirements and various other things as well, even more so than they envisaged. You know, there was a bit of transition there. And I'm sure the experience of having built that Dublin team up into, fairly formidable team last year and going in the right direction is bound to be helpful, in doing it now in Galway. And as we said there, 35 players, 19 different clubs, and you still have the likes of Davy Burke and Cathal Mannion to come into it. One thing I would hope, though, there's going to be the guts of about 15 or 20 players trimmed from that sort of first team squad, as it were. They'll go back into development. He's made it clear in it. But I'd love to see some of them come back in post league. There isn't really the time for a championship, because, in all fairness, and we've seen it with Galway forwards over the time, there's a big difference between hurling in the end of January and, like the last weekend, a very poor pitch, compared to doing it, we'll say, when the sod is firmer, it's a faster game as well. So I don't think it's fair to entirely judge players, given the exposure, a match or two at the end of January, when really what you're looking for is someone to produce the goods come summertime. And I think the other point just on that as well, that what these couple of games have shown up is Galway may have a scoring threat other than Conor Whelan. I know other players are getting goals, but he's the go-to guy that you look like is going to uh, unleash or unlock a defence. We've seen it with Declan McLaughlin for Portumna in the last few years. Like his first instinct is sort of, is there a goal on here? And we're now seeing it with Anthony Burns, and that's a big step up, doing it for Loughrea and taking it into Galway. And again, the last night, his first instinct seemed to be, is there a goal on here? Can I go from it? For a debutant or starting his first one, you'd imagine he'd pick off the point or do whatever. And there's a lot of positives in it, but I think equally they'll be careful not to get carried away with it. For that Clare team, only for that Clare team had started the All Ireland last year. That poor enough Clare team outscored Galway by 9 points to 6 in the second half last Saturday as well. And I think they're the reference points a management would go to say, hang on a second, lads, let's not get too carried away here. That second half performance was pretty dreadful relative to everything else, and it'll keep a lot of feet on the ground.
Just on Anthony Burns, as we probably did well not to mention him yet, because there has to be a bit of excitement there when he gets 2-3 at the weekend. I was actually taking back past the archives there, and a few years ago, Anthony Burns would have played Junior B for Loughrea in the Junior B All Ireland series that they run down in Limerick every year. It's just mental to think that you can go from that level to 2-3. to 2-3 at the weekend. Wasn't even playing senior with Loughrea at the time. But it's hard to know, Carrock. Did Anthony Burns, did he just relish with all the injuries Loughrea had in the forwards, and he was nearly relishing becoming that main man, and he's just built on it?
Yeah, it's hard to know. Like unless you're at Loughrea club training and maybe seeing what he's doing outside the pitch, it's hard to know. But players do develop late. Do you know what I mean? And that's going back to my point of it's not as easy as when people talk about developing paths, and there are players that just don't follow that line in every kind of sport, and sometimes they can be the very best of them. But I suppose for us, anyone that's been watching the club championship would have seen he was outstanding last
Yeah.
year. And I suppose then the question was, could he step it up even the All-Ireland semi-final? He did. And then to get his chance to last night, I think in all positions, especially in corner forward, if you can get a good start, at inter-county level, it just opens the door for you. And it probably changes even the dynamic of the next cornerback's going to be marking you. Now, you have to kind of prefix that with, Ian McNamara probably wasn't suited to cornerback. But at the same time, I think the biggest thing was his goal threat and his ruthlessness. Do you know? I think John referenced that sometimes we can, if you have a corner forward or someone that take the easy option, tap it over the bar. Like the second ball he got, he was thinking a goal, and he probably could have ended up with more. Do you know? That's the reality of it. I did also like himself and Connor and how they shaped up. So I suppose a lot of us have been talking about Eamon O'Shea and the impact he might have had for the last couple of years, but it was definitely clear to me in the last two games the kind of the setup. The same thing with Declan McLaughlin when he was in there with Conor Whelan. Two of them were kind of very deep, nearly on the edge of the square. And Tiernan Killeen has just been assisting so much. I've been really, really impressed with him. Just the amount of good passes he puts in. He puts it, on the right side of the forward. Very like the kind of service that Aaron Gillane has been getting for the last couple of years. And I suppose anyone that's been watching Galway for 3 or 4 years, that has been the frustration. We haven't fed our good forwards with good ball. You can't do it all the time. But when you do have somebody like Tiernan Killeen who's not greedy on the half forward line, whose first instinct is not just to shoot, it does open up space for the likes of Anthony Burns last week, for Decky McLaughlin the week before that, and hopefully Conor Whelan will begin to score more as he goes on. So look, we need options in there. We haven't been really scoring that much. If you look back, even last year against Dublin, it was Conor Cooney and Evan Nyland probably scoring the majority for us, and lads chipping in one or two. You need to score goals, and that's something we haven't had the threat of in the last couple of years. So, is Anthony Burns going to be brilliant in every league game from now on? Probably not. But definitely it's somebody that has a talent, has pace, which is massive. I think even going back to John's point about lads in the summer, if you have pace and on that pitch at the start of February, you'd hope then in better pitches in April, May, he would do damage. So look, it's a positive. It's something we need. And it's great to have somebody at that age profile that's not 1920, that's in their mid-20s, that is a bit more streetwise, I think, from the Galway Championship as well, to be fair to him. And look, he took his chance, and that's all you can do. And you'd hope now that he builds on that the next couple of games, and whatever chance he gets. But I think John's point of a lot to do in the second half as well, because Galway had some poor shooting, poor wides in the second half. And against better teams, we would have blown it. And we've blown leads, under Henry Shefton, Leinster finals and such. So that is something that they will have to be looked at. Once you're on top, you have to make sure you keep ticking the balls over the bar.
Yeah, we will touch on that second half too, because as I mentioned there, the shooting did let them down on occasions. But just on Burns, even the way he takes the goals, just going at his man, just going direct, John, just so refreshing to see.
Yeah, what surprised me about him, I saw him for Loughrea initially, and he's actually a tall. His physique is deceptive, and I don't know if you saw him even afterwards. He was standing beside Conor Whelan when he was getting man of the match, and he was towering above him, and yet on the pitch didn't look that way. He sort of bent over going, but very, very fast. And I'd say the guy has done phenomenal work to get, as you said, from junior B to a senior inter-county player. But like, he seems to have given himself every single chance with his physique. And if you have a guy who can win high ball as well, it gives you another option. If a defender is cleared and under pressure, it's not always going to come in the way you want it. So he certainly gives an option there. Whether that'll transfer into the summer or Declan McLaughlin or not or whatever, it's to have those options so that if you lose a starting player early in a championship match, or you have this flurry of games or whatever, that's where the strength of your squad is going to come into that. So he's certainly, in these opening games. Oisin Lohan is another one. I'm dying to see
Yeah.
more of him at this level as well. And it's great to see these lads getting the chance into it. But just what you referred to there with regard to Gavin Lee at centre back, and is he the one to fill that position? I look at that question a different way. I've often wondered where Galway can play Gavin Lee rather than anything else. And for a lad that was brought in straight from leaving cert straight in there, and I have to confess, I fail to see the spark that an awful lot of other people quite clearly could see in him, both at club and with the college and with the county team. And I often wondered, I've often asked Clare Bridge people and others, like, where should this guy be played? And it varies from midfield to wing forward to wherever, but certainly these early games would see to say here's two problems solved. We've got a position for Gavin Lee, and Galway has a centre back problem solved into it. Again, how that's going to transfer into, we'll say, when teams go full strength and where we've faster pitches and whatever. But it's certainly exciting. It's certainly exciting. And as Cork's saying, like, unless you have, 3-6, at least an 8 or a 9, and 11-14 you need sorted. The other position you need sorted, of course, is goalkeeper. And who is it? Is it Darragh Fahy or is it Éanna Murphy? You
Probably
know,
looks like Derek's in pole
Yeah.
position at the minute.
it does, and I think you can't keep chopping and changing your goalkeeper either. So
Yeah.
you're as well off nearly pick with one and go with it and give the stability. I think Galway this year needs stability in positions. I don't think anybody is expecting instant success, but I think they are looking for serious progress to be made. And you can't keep chopping and changing those key positions. You got to go with someone and give them a block to go with it. But there's it's an exciting. Suddenly, there's a bit of excitement back in Galway hurling when you look at that squad and you look at the potential that's there, and you really can't wait for matches to come quick enough. But they're going to be spread out, and they're not going to be anywhere near Galway for the next five either. So that's
Yeah.
not a help.
It is interesting because Michal has talked too about getting the consistency within this team and getting them more settled. So it's obviously a big aim for him too in this National Hurling League come round six to have close to his championship team because last year we probably didn't.
Yeah, but it's also been set up like it's Wexford the next day. But you'd like to think going to Limerick and going to Cork, there's going to be skin in the game for in those last two matches. You could be playing for a
Yeah.
league final place. And I think both counties or those three will want that as well because, you're turning around fairly quickly and into Leinster Championship or in their case, Munster Championship. So I think we could learn, you'd like to think you're going to learn a lot, particularly from the Limerick Cork ones. Wexford gives an opportunity to do a bit more experimenting, but you'd imagine you're going to be seeing the championship team really coming into shape for that game in Limerick and again in Cork. And, without jumping ahead of it, you saw it as well, like Tipperary, you know, going full throttle last Sunday. Limerick, a lot of new face or a lot of experimenting there and still had enough to get over the line. So, yeah, there's a lot to look forward to in that.
Overall, Carrick, on the general landscape of things here, like we beat a Clare team in the end. It's obviously not very close to Clare's championship squad, but there's nothing really Galway can do about that. How do you assess the victory and performance? Like we have referenced that the second half that they will want to improve on that performance, but then plenty of positives obviously then in the first.
Yeah, well, I suppose like when you're looking at the league, okay, Clare, Cork, Limerick, they're the three best teams in Ireland. But I suppose below that is where we need to get back to. Do you know what I mean? And that should be our first step. So I suppose yes, Clare are missing players, but again, we have no control on that. We need to look after ourselves. And I think in the first 5 minutes, outside the first score, we didn't start great. The opposite probably to the Kilkenny game where we were just really on it. We used the ball well. And then the blitz before half time really gave energy. And goals give energy. And that's, I know Michal has referenced that to try and get, the Galway public back. Because, there hasn't been the support really that's been in other games. That's just reality. Even the Dublin game last year, there wasn't a great crowd. And whereas I thought Saturday night was a great crowd, and you have to give supporters some reason to go in and getting goals, getting new players in like Anthony Burns. I think the biggest benefit I've seen so far, Paul, and it was throughout the two games, is Cian Fahey and Tom Monaghan in midfield. There's nothing better than one of those players like Tom Monaghan won a ruck, which he probably shouldn't be winning just before maybe 5 minutes before half time. Got the ball 40 yards out over the bar, and it just lifts everyone. And that's something we probably haven't had, is that combination of midfield. And I think midfield is an area where every team is going to be chop and change no matter what happens. Do you know what I mean? Because you don't have a Cian Lynch, you don't have, Will O'Donoghue, and no one else does. But it's trying to get the best balance, and then having somebody else that can go into that position and impact the game. But I do think the second half, like if you think, let's flip it and say Clare did have three or four of the big guns to come off the bench. With the amount of misses we had in the second half, which were poor ones, the momentum could have swung very, very quickly, because it just drained the energy from the crowd. It drained the energy from the players. And I think until Anthony Burns actually got that tap over point from 21 yards out, we were struggling to score. So in a way, it might suit the management team, because they can say, look, this is what we can do. But if we do drop our standards on the pitch and get sloppy with striking, get sloppy with passes, overcomplicating things instead of taking the score, we'll be in trouble. And one word that John Kiley mentioned, and I think it just shows what we let go on Saturday, was momentum. And Galway could have let the momentum of that game slip in the second half by not taking simple scores, by not just being cute enough to tap on three or four more when we should have. And against a better team, you will be let back. But look, that's the league. That's where we are. But overall, a very productive night. But that's the beauty of this Galway team. It is a new team. There is learning to do. There is things to improve. But you have to be happy. And I think as John talked about Wexford, Cork, and Limerick, those three games, I think it will be taken as a block again. And we do play Wexford in the first round of the championship, so I do think you'll probably see different lads maybe getting games. But once the squad is trimmed during the week, everyone will be saying, right, this is my chance now. We've three games to put my hand up to start first round championship, and it comes around very quickly.
You think Cian Fahey and Tom Monaghan could be the answer midfield, because they are two players that have kind of went between a lot of positions in the Galway jersey?
Yeah, I think so far you've seen that kind of the last two games, especially, they've worked well together. Both are, I suppose, different. Tom is a bit lighter, and Cian is a bit stronger. But I do think they're well able to go forward. Cian is well able to defend. Obviously, would have played in the half back line last year, and probably would have learned a bit from playing six in some games last year as well. And that probably is something that might help Gavin Lee going forward, because you do need someone to be thinking that way in midfield as well. So it's a work in progress, but I do think the two of them are playing well, and hopefully, I suppose, Paul, they can stay as a partnership. I think that's the one place that you do need a partnership to develop, and then you do need somebody else to come on. If it's Sean and Ann can come in there, Cathal Mannion, I suppose, depends where his role is, and even David Burke. So
Yeah, to step there.
yeah, and you're looking for two to kind of do the heavy lifting, I suppose, for your 50 minutes. And then somebody to come in and impact depending on how the game is going. But I've been very impressed with both of them, and they're chipping in with scores, which you need from midfield as well, because you need lads to if you're scoring 3 or 4 points in midfield between the two, you're going well.
Overall, John, what would be your key takeaway from Galway's victory over Clare?
Oh, a lot of it. I think that second quarter, let's not forget, Clare actually did start quite well,
Mm.
surprisingly well. I don't think Galway took the lead in about the 20th minute or thereabouts, but then, once they got that bit of opening, and as Conor was saying, like, you get that momentum into it, you drill the goals, and you do get goals lift team. There could have been another two or three as well. Like, I mean, Eamon Foodie produced a couple of good saves particularly from Conor Whelan. Um, so there's a buzz about that, and you could see it developing more. And you were saying, like, Cian Fahey and Tom Monaghan, they're developing into a good partnership in that. But at the same time, it's only early February. You can't get too carried away with any of that part. And I think Galway will put a bit more of the focus on, worryingly, the lack of leadership when the scores weren't coming in the second half. Like, there was 10 wides in the second half. I think there was 4 or 5 in a row where maybe shooting was not the number one option. That I think it was Anthony Burns actually that ended it, and picked off a good one there. But I was a bit concerned at that stage there wasn't somebody to actually just take the flow of the game and say, hang on a second, we need to work one in, work it, get a close range free, just stop, change the momentum here and do that. And but I think that second half performance will be hugely beneficial to team management in terms of, this is what we can't allow happen, this is where we need to improve, to be still winning the game against the All Ireland champions and, being able to get away with, a callow period like that. But there's so many players there now, and I think it's good, it's timely that they're reducing the squad. They're only going to bring it down to, probably just under 40 or something like that. It's still going to
Yeah.
be
A lot of
quite.
squads are carrying around 38 now, like.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're going to inevitably have one or two injured that may or may not be included within that. There's still huge scope with it, but if you picked, if you sat down and picked your best Galway team from the opening three games, and then sat down and picked another 15, you'd have two very good teams there. There seems to be at least two minimum for each position, and you're going to need that, given the helter-skelter of the games that's coming in it, and you look at the squads that elsewhere, and you will get the players, will if you have that sort of settled environment, guys will mushroom into it. Your Gavin Lees will just take over centre back or not, or somebody with it. But I think I think there's a lot of optimism there, and rightly so. How it develops will be fabulous to watch into that, but that should bring the interest to the whole lot of it as well. I think we'll learn a lot from these remaining three league games, or hopefully four remaining league games that may come from that. But yeah, to win that, to have lost, put it a different way, to have lost to a second string Clare team at home and
Yeah.
a second home loss in it would have been a fair bit of a damper. But look at that, never, in fairness, looked like materialising.
For both of you, I was putting the question last week about Gavin Lee at six for the championship. From what you see now in the last two games, is Gavin Lee your six for championship?
I think he's the six until to give him the opportunity to do it. Like, why would you look elsewhere when you have the obvious potential that is there, and maybe he can develop into nail down this position into it. So until he relinquishes it as such, it should be his. I don't think you need to start looking elsewhere. It could be, as I said earlier, it could be just the perfect double boost of filling a key position and also finding a role. For a guy who's been there, how many years is he in there now? It's as I said,
Well,
coming
I
in.
think he was in since the very start of Shefflin's tenure, if I'd
Yeah,
be right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Fourth season, wasn't it?
I think before that. I think even
Yeah.
before that. Like so why not? Like he look at it this way. What do you want in a centre back? You want somebody who's commanding under a ball, can deliver left and right, can move, has good vision in it. He seems to have all of that. So maybe this is where, he's going to mushroom into and fulfill the potential that so many have clearly seen in him over those years.
He brings something as well that's nearly a different sort of element of that raw bit of pace as well, Garrick.
Yeah, and I think he also probably even so far has kind of dovetails nicely for Park Mannion and
Mm.
probably allows Porrick to be a bit more of a conductor as well back there. But I suppose with Gavin and will he be number six? I suppose look, we would hope he is, but there will be one of these games. It could be one of the Cork or Limerick games that he probably be under pressure. But that's part of coming an inter-county number six. Do you know what I mean? And I think the biggest thing in Galway is that we don't, let's just say he's playing number six and David Reedy gets 5 or 6 points off him. That's something he's going to learn from. You know what I mean? But we can't, and I don't think the manager would do the same. We can't panic then and start changing things around for the next couple of games. If he's going to be our six, brilliant. And he has to learn. Declan Hannon didn't go back to number six and was brilliant. If you think back to the first year John Conlon went to six, there was questions asked about him. I think till probably the Wexford quarterfinal that year, and he was outstanding. So it is a position that he'll have to learn, and he'll only learn and get better at from probably being tested by different players. So like even the first day, Cian Kenny, not an orthodox, probably 11. It was a busier number 11, but again, those are things that Gavin will work on. I think having Park beside him is very good. I also thought that Killian Trayers did absolutely nothing wrong the last day. He was quietly effective. Somebody that we've seen play obviously football and hurling for Galway, And I think the biggest thing, and he's always had this, is he's an athlete, which is something that is very good. But his use of the ball is very good. And if you have 5, 6, and 7 who can use the ball well, it is a good attribute to have. So I think Killian did himself did justice the last day as well. But with
Same
Gavin,
with Dan Loftus as well
yeah,
in the
just
corner.
going to mention him. Yeah,
Yeah.
do you know he was, and I suppose that's going to be another place. I suppose cornerback. You have Morrissey, you have Loftus, you have Grealish, you have Shane Morgan. I'm probably forgetting somebody else.
Tim
You have,
Burke.
yeah. Do you know if into Burke? Dahi probably. It was a pity Dahi went off so early. Because if you're going to have Gavin at 6, you'd imagine then Dahi would be 3 or someplace else. I suppose where you put Dahi to his best effect is a question. But I think the beauty of having Dahi, not having Dahi at 6, I suppose, is you can put him in a lot of different places. And at the end of the day, in hopefully in the bigger games in Leinster, if you're playing at Kilkenny and Croke Park, for example, you're going to have to use Dahi someplace. He's going to try and put out a fire someplace. So I think that's good. But it would have been nice if you did have 70 minutes of Dahi at 3, Gavin at 6, and getting that kind of communication. Obviously, Finton went in and did well as well. So that's going to be a key as well. I suppose in today's game, you can't just have a 6 and sit. You have to have a 6-3 and one of the midfielders to work in kind of unison, because it is such a kind of a systematic defense. But look, I think Gavin's been brilliant so far. But there would be a game he won't be as good, and I suppose it's important that we as Galway people make sure that that we understand it's a learning process. He is young, as John said, even though he's around a long time, and if he's going to be the future number 6, you have to give him time. You have to give him a chance to learn as well.
That is the one concern, John, as Carrick says there. Dai Burke forced off early with the hamstring. He was kind of easing back into it against Kilkenny. You were kind of hoping for him to get a few games back under his belt, and just with a hamstring injury, it could be up. He could be up against it now to play a lot of these league games.
Yeah, and I think age profile will start coming against a player like him as well. That is, he's been such a wonderful servant. He's probably one of the best fullbacks we've ever seen in the modern era. So there shouldn't be a debate about where you should be playing him if he's fit enough. I think fullback is his position, particularly as he goes to the latter stages of his career. He's not going to have maybe the mobility he had of previous times, but he's able to read a game so well. But what are your options for fullback? If he's not available, is Fenton Burke your immediate one? Is TJ Brennan? Where's your plan for TJ Brennan in that defensive unit as well? And plus all the other guys that we've listed, throughout all of that. It was such a pity, like 10, 11, 12 minutes in, off with a hamstring injury, no game for the next few weeks. Um, but I would imagine, if he's fit, he's full back. And then, what are you looking at for the other ones? Is there a role there for Finton Burke as well? Is there a role for TJ Brennan? I thought Darren Morrissey, has had a great start to 2025. With that, he's certainly, one of the best in. Then, as you said, you see the newer lads coming through there as well. But it's to get those options so that if you do lose a fella early in a game, that you have an immediate one to go into it. But the squad seems to be there. The numbers seem to be there. Whether they stand up to the intensity that's going to come a bit further down, there's only one way you're going to find out. But don't forget as well, a lot of these lads have, serious success tasted at underage level, and we all know it doesn't transfer into it, but they've experienced big days as underage players as well. There's nothing to suggest they shouldn't be able to step up to the breach as well and develop into that, especially if you have a good environment, which seems to be developing at the moment.
They're probably just hoping now to get this result against Wexford and secure automatic safety straight away. The 6 points gets you there and safe enough after that, because probably after that Tipperary game, as we mentioned at the start, retaining the status was obviously vital. But just with the way and how competitive this league system is, John, that's probably the next game.
Yeah, I wonder are Clare that interested in maintaining their status? Like they've certainly their opening two games would suggest they're not overly bothered about it. I think, and I know that it's such a pity that the end of the league and the start of the championship are practically overlapping, because there's nothing develops a team more. If this team got to a league final, you'd suddenly, people aren't going to drive. travel down to Cork to see them play. They may go somewhat to Limerick to see them, but if you had a league final in Thurles against Cork or whoever it might be, or Limerick, you'd get that momentum going from the crowd as well. And for a developing team, that would be very helpful. And we've seen over the years, actually, league finals have helped enormously in the likes of Galway, where they have a plethora of options to consider to get there. Whether the winner or not wouldn't really matter a whole pile into it. So I think their ambitions after this opening block of games will be considerably higher than just maintaining their status in the top flight. They should do that against Wexford. Wexford are not in a good place, certainly at the moment. But I think having a crack off Limerick or having a crack, put it this way, the last thing they need is a heavy outing or a heavy defeat against either Limerick or Cork as you're
Yeah.
heading into a championship. That's where the line would need to be drawn, I would imagine, in it. But yeah, you need a bit of momentum. Like with Galway going into the championship, need some momentum when you have essentially a new team going in there, a relatively new team. It would be a huge benefit.
I think as well, though, Paul, the Wexford game is, when we talk about consistency, the Wexford game is a key point on that, because if you think back to the Leinster Championship last year, we had the draw against Kilkenny. We probably didn't know that we weren't playing that well, but we went down to Wexford and it was not a good performance. It lacked everything we would have expected from the team. And I don't know, was that a mental thing on the day, or but if you remember the game, like, we never got going. We had an extra man and we still never got going. So I think
Even the last 2 or 3 years
yeah,
against Wexford.
it was such a flat performance. So I do think the Wexford game, yes, is definitely set up for us to win, but it is a kind of an insight into our mindset. And I do think, and as John references, a great thing for the second half kind of dip the last against Clare, it nearly sets us up nicely now for that Wexford game, because that needs to be a game that Galway focus on themselves and perform. If you perform, the amount of players that Wexford don't have, you should be winning. But we don't have a good record in Wexford Park. We haven't gone down there and played well in a long time. So I do think kind of, in a performance and consistency place, I think they will be tuned into that game, and the manager will be saying, this is a game now. Again, we will see probably different players, but that we'll see our lads ready to kind of tune in and perform, because in the Leinster Championship, we haven't done it. And I think the second thing about staying up, I think Clare probably don't have the same interest, but I do think counties know, like, that even money wise, gate wise, it's
Yeah.
important to stay up in Division One, and that is the reality of a county like Galway, who have two, three, well, six probably between the three grades teams that progress consistently. You need to have gates, you need to have Division One games, and especially with the new lights. And I do think the lights were a great thing for the last couple of games. I thought they were brilliant on Saturday night and having it, but you need to be there in Division One, playing against the better teams, against the big teams, to sustain that as well. So, I think Wexford, we should be winning it, but recent history isn't in our favour. And I think mentally it's a good test for some of the younger Galway lads to be able to perform when you're expected to perform.
Yeah, I think you probably will see probably a close to full strength Wexford team, given the 2 week gap now, and it's one they need to win if they have any chance to stay up now. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops for them. As what did you make of the pitch on Saturday night?
It was in terrible state. There's no
Yeah,
getting away from it, as it was indeed for the Tipperary match. And it's only when you see, the condition the Gaelic grounds is in on Sunday, or any of the other games we looked at, and you know, you just say, gosh, at a time when you're turning on your floodlights, there's a buzz around the new management and all of this, and you have a pitch for both teams. I felt very sorry for players on both sides who were getting their chance, getting their exposure, and were getting it on a pitch that was inferior to what they would train with on their own club pitches.
it's tough
Yeah.
too on Galway because it's not lending itself all the time to free flowing hurling. Like even when we see it get tipped.
Absolutely. And dare I say it, even as a spectacle, for people sitting down watching the match on telly, whether they're in Dublin or Kerry or wherever it might be, you know, we're sick to the teeth of watching Pearse Stadium being windswept and rain on championship games and live. There was a time there I was convinced every time the game was live on telly, it was wet and windy. Galway Mayo, this sort of stuff, even in the middle of summer. And here you are, a Saturday evening. It's prime viewing for sport. You have a good match, Galway, Clare, neighbours, a lot of carryovers into it, floodlights onto it. And the beauty of floodlights is you've no idea how full or empty the ground is. It's
Yeah.
you're focused entirely on that. And unfortunately, to get a surface, that really hadn't improved an awful lot from a couple of weeks earlier. And I know huge effort goes into it. I really do. I feel sorry for them because it's certainly never a lack of effort to get Pearse Stadium in pristine state. But for young lads going out, maybe this might be the one chance, that Patrick Crotty gets for Clare, or or Anthony Burns might for Galway or anything like that. It was very unfortunate it was that way, and it was a poor spectacle looking at it that way. And it's just a pity. It's just a pity. There's no getting away from it.
It is a concern, all right. The one hope is the games will probably start to ease off now for a while. There's no more hurling games there for quite a while. Footballers only have a few games left there for the league, so you would hope, Carol, that it can be given time now and hopefully be right for championship then.
Yeah, because I think Galway play Wexford in the Championship in Pure Stadium, and I suppose look, time of year as well. It's not going to it's not going to improve quickly either. So it does
Yeah.
need time. I think that Galway played Donegal there maybe in the football, and you would hope. Look, you would hope that it is because John mentioned the weather. The weather was absolutely perfect on Saturday night. There was no wind. It was cold, but there was no rain, and and I do personally sometimes get sick of people giving out about Pierce Stadium, on the wind and the rain, and because we've all been there on lovely summer days, and the surface is perfect, but it was disappointing, and you can, there is frustration, but you would hope, as you said, Paul, that there is a bit of a break now, and they get things right, and that when we do have Wexford at home, that it does lend itself to a good surface, because most of the time it is, and it is usually a perfect surface, but I suppose it was poor, and it was even walking across it after the game. The conditions were poor, and it's not alone just trying to pick up the ball. It's even you're planting your feet, everything. So it wasn't ideal. It didn't look good. Outside of that, I thought the itself, Pure Stadium is looking great. As in, what they've done with the tarmac around the place, much easier to get around. I think the lights and what they've done is brilliant, and hopefully it'll even improve again, because I do think Saturday nights in Galway for football or hurling hopefully will become a thing, and that's what you want. You want to get people in the gate. There was a good crowd. I didn't hear the attendance, but it looked good, which is what you want, and I suppose you need that for the team, and the team needs it, but also, as we talked about earlier, the team need to give the supporters a reason to support them. There was nobody, to be honest, at the Kilkenny game. As John said, it is a trek to Páirc Uí Chaoimh. You'd hope Limerick will be a thing. And I think of all the games left, I think Limerick will be one that we'll really see maybe a test to go with. There is that little history between the two teams in the last couple of years. Obviously, we've been on the bad side of that the last couple of years, but you'd hope that people do go and follow this team, because there's plenty to like about what we've seen so far, but the pitch definitely hasn't been one of
Yeah.
them.
It's an awful pity as well that the Gaelic grounds was unplayable when Galway were meant to go down there last year, and they reversed that fixture. Because if you look at the way it's building up here now, you could have, Galway hopefully get a win over Wexford, and in the second last match, they would be hosting Limerick on a Saturday night in Pearse
Yeah.
Stadium. And I think the buzz that you could build up around that and the momentum to it, and that'd be a big, big match for Galway to win. As I said, it's just unfortunate the way it was. Galway, conceded, were willing to swap the fixtures, but it now leaves a new Galway management with three away games in a row, heading into a championship that starts with two away ones. And Galway, let's face it, didn't get much benefit from hosting Limerick last year either. Like I'm struggling to even remember it, but it
I
didn't
remember
carry
being at
forward.
that double header. Yeah, the
Yeah.
weather was
It certainly
terrible.
didn't carry forward into a benefit for championship or any of that. But
Mm.
look, c'est la vie. It's just a pity. You could have had a big game coming up there, and maybe a chance for Galway to show Pearse Stadium in a better light. But I agree entirely. Saturday night, we're used to covering rugby, Friday, Saturday nights it's an entirely different occasion. It's an entirely different buzz. And certainly Galway as a venue to attract, overnight followers as well. It's worst place to be in Ireland than in Salthill on a Saturday night, even still.
Just on it, lads, when you see form of the other teams that are going to be in the Leinster Championship. Obviously, Dublin look very good in 1B, but at the minute they haven't really been playing any of the top teams yet. Kilkenny have been mixed, I suppose, so far from what we've seen in the league, and then Wexford obviously down a lot of bodies. I know we're talking about a project and a rebuild that Mihal has here, and we'll all admit he does have that, but in one sense, from what you've seen, Garrick, it is starting to give fans to be optimistic now about this Leinster Championship.
Yeah, and I think the important thing, Paul, is the Leinster Championship is what we have to look at. Do you know what I
Yeah.
mean? I think anything outside of that is would be foolish to go away to look at because we didn't get out of the we weren't in the top three teams in Leinster last year. So first things first for me is we have to get back at the top three teams. We didn't beat Wexford, we didn't beat Dublin, and we didn't beat Kilkenny. It's as simple as that last year. So we need to make sure that the first game against Wexford, that is a huge one. If you win that, obviously you build momentum. But each team is a different prospect. And maybe last year, we went up to Antrim, performed okay, but even that day there was questions of different positions. There was players moved left, right, and centre. I suppose looking at the other teams, Kilkenny, I've seen Kilkenny twice now. I think Kilkenny probably have a lot of questions to answer as well, especially up front. They're
Yeah.
relying on Mossy Keown to do a lot. They've been chopping and changing in midfield. You had Peter McDonald played against Galway, wasn't in the 26th. Then you had Malloy coming back, played well. He was in the 26th previous week. Kilkenny, I suppose, have a couple of injuries, the TJs and the Adrian Mullins, but TJ is getting older. You're not going to expect him to play to the championship. So I actually do think it's a wide open championship for any team, and I suppose Dublin will be gutted that they performed poorly in the Leinster final last year, but they performed very, very well in the Leinster Championship. But for Galway, there's
Is
no
the
team
Bob
to fear,
O'Keefe
but at the
realistic?
same time,
Is the Bob O'Keefe realistic for Galway to win it this year?
I think so,
Oh,
yeah. But you have to take it step by step. You have to get there. Do you know what I mean? You have to win. You have to get to the final. And maybe that's where the last couple of years, I know we've talked about a couple of times here in the last couple of years winning Leinster, but you have to be in the final. But is it realistic? Yes. But you have to perform to get there, and that's the thing. And I think the Wexford game was the example. We were so flat last year against Wexford in a game that everyone thought we'd just go down and perform and win. Probably thought that we played better than we did against Kilkenny at home, and we got a bit of momentum to finish off strong. But it is realistic, but you have to prove your mettle to get there, and you have to win your home games as well. Something we didn't do last year. Kilkenny got a draw, Dublin beat us. So if you win your home games, you qualify in the top three. That's the first thing I'd be looking at, and not to be looking at three teams coming out of Leinster and us stuck below that. That'd be the first thing. Bob O'Keefe is the next goal after that, but get out in the top three first of all.
How would you see it, John?
yeah, very similar. I'm intrigued as to how Offaly will
Mm.
perform actually after coming back into it. They will have a fair bit of momentum built up through the league the way they're going. They've a lot of those under 20s are starting to make a mark there. They'll fancy a crack of Galway and Tullamore. Like if you think of it, Galway are going to be opening against Kilkenny down in Nolan Park, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, let's call a spade a spade. Kilkenny will probably fancy the chances of winning that one. So you could be going to Tullamore on the back of a defeat, taking on an Offaly team that, will suddenly they need to lay down a marker. Johnny Kelly in charge of them, the whole lot. Um, they've a lot of players coming through there, but no more so than Galway do. But you'd have to imagine it's between Galway and Kilkenny to win Leinster. I don't think Dublin have pushed on. They deservedly beat Galway in Pearse Stadium last year. They didn't really push on from that. I don't see a whole lot. They'll get a boost out of the club championship win, but can Wexford pick up from where they are? They seem in a lot of disarray. Antrim somewhat similarly. So you'd imagine really you should, if you're to divide it up into it, you should have Galway and Offaly, or sorry, Galway and Kilkenny, sort of the top two. You have a next two there that would have Dublin, uh, probably Wexford enough to cover, and then Offaly Antrim. So it's almost like three tiers of it, looking at it from this far out. Um, you know, Galway haven't won Leinster in recent years, but they've been close enough to it as well. That late goal, stuff like that. It's certainly not beyond the bounds of possibility. I don't think it's been laid down as that that's going to be a marker at this particular time. But there isn't three or four very good teams in Leinster this year. So why not? And Kilkenny are not um, streets ahead of anyone else in it and in any shape or form. So it'd be a welcome boost, wouldn't it? But it's certainly within reach. But they could be going into round three having got two rattles in Kilkenny and Offaly or something like that. We'll see. It's within the reach, definitely.
Not to get ahead of ourselves, and still is only February, but when you look at it compared to last year, Carrick, when you come back and you look at the season last year, there wasn't many times last year that we seen positive signs that we've already seen early on this year.
Yeah, I suppose last year we were probably caught between a rock and a hard place, Paul. Last year, we still probably had a lot of the 2017, 2018
Yeah.
team, some of them coming back from injuries, some of them, maybe trying to find form. And it is hard not to give the benefit of the doubt to some of those legends. Like some of them were Galway legends, lads who had, been there since 2012, some of them. Do you know what I mean? So I think whereas this year it's different because you have that freshness with the new management team coming in, and also, younger players coming in and taking the chance. Okay, you might say, even going back to, was it 2 years ago in the Leinster Championship, Jack McLaughlin came off the bench and scored a point against in Nolan Park, but it wasn't as consistent. Whereas probably this year you've had bright sparks. You've talked about Oisin Lohan in the first game, Killian Traers, Anthony Burns, Loftus. There has been bright sparks. So I think it's probably being a bit more consistent. We understand that it's a rebuild. We probably didn't think that last year. We probably thought last year we have to win the Leinster Championship. We should be winning the Leinster Championship, and the rug was taken underneath us. Do you know what I mean? And that's probably where we were last year. So it is a different year. And I think it was interesting to listen to, I think it was Shane McGrath was on the RT podcast saying, that, even counties like Galway, that even if we'd lost the first three games, management could come under pressure. I don't think that really, to be honest. I do think that Micheál Donoghu's management team are different to other management teams that Galway's have had. Micheál has won the All-Ireland with Galway. He's won Liam McCarthy. We all know that there has been a change. We've lost some brilliant players. So I do think there will be patience, but there's nothing better for development than winning. And if we can get off to a good start and continue the momentum we have in the league, I think that'll follow through. And that's the best way to develop, is to win. Like we're not a million miles off any team, but we do have to be conscious of, we need to earn the right again to be winning games in Leinster. And probably that's slipped in the last couple of years. We probably thought we'll win them anyways, and that's probably what cost us in the last couple of years.
That is the thing, John. The freshness has added to people being more optimistic and showing positive signs of Go Ireland this year.
Yeah, in fairness, though, I thought we saw it as well during Henry Shefflin's time. And if you look at not necessarily the reaction to the match against Tipperary, but there were 10 changes going to Kilkenny. They may have been pre-planned anyway,
Yeah.
regardless of and a lot of them were not fresh faces coming in for Kilkenny. It was actually going back to a lot of the older heads as well. And I think they probably realised we needed a bit of stability there, or it could have been a very difficult afternoon in Kilkenny. So how they react to setbacks and defeats will be key as well. If somebody, for the sake of example, hasn't worked out terribly well, is that person gone, and you're bringing back in, you're bringing back in a Jason Flynn or somebody who's been there for several years instead of bringing in Oisin Lohan or an Anthony Burns or somebody like that. So, how they react to defeat will probably tell us even more than how they react building up momentum and going there. But there certainly seems to be a buzz. There's no doubt about it. There seems to be a buzz there, and I think there's a clear understanding as well that this is not going to be an overnight success. There's a 4-year term there. It's probably going to take most of that. I think particularly with Henry Shefflin, excuse me, I think that there was going to be an instant kick. Whereas in actual fact, it was slow regression the whole way, not helped by injuries, not helped by so many things, but the wheel has turned a bit here in this regard, and there's certainly a lot to be optimistic about, and it looks like an intriguing journey ahead. I don't think anybody is expecting instant success. great bonus if it comes. But at least once it's heading in the right direction, I think it's the first and foremost is what people want.
Absolutely, and that is all we do have time for on today's show. Um, So it is Galway. They have a break obviously this weekend. Fitzgibbon Cup taking centre stage, and there is some Galway representation. We're crowding this on Tuesday night, so you either playing MTU Cork, and you have Derek Fahey, Dermot Hanafy, Sean O'Hanlon, and Anthony Keady as well on the extended UL panel. So best wishes to all those players, and thanks a million to John and Cárthach for coming on.
Thanks, Bob.